dragging him down. All these dudes finally have enough.
Step back. Please, step
All right,
back.
enough of
Step
you.
back, guys.
On June 9th, he drove his truck downtown with an unidentified woman to hand out large quantities of face shields to individuals who appear to be engaged in
The
violence
Bionics.
and vandalism.
That's not, like some kind of anything extreme. It's celebrating, a quarter of a millennia about the American army. It's like, I don't understand why that's controversial.
Another Democrat politician arrested after trying to make a show for himself to enhance his public profile, fighting on behalf of illegal aliens who are being arrested because of federal law enforcement actually enforcing the law. This guy is called Brad Lander, and we'll listen to this dude in a second, I know. But he got arrested today and released. Kathy Hochul, his mom of New York, came, got him out of jail, dragged him on out, and then they screamed at the media about racism. So what we'll see here is the story from the New York Times. Obviously, they're there. They say that this guy is a Democrat. He was observing proceedings. Videos were taken by reporters. We'll watch several of them. He appears to hold on to the man as agents are shepherding the man, the illegal, out the door, right? They report on it saying he repeatedly asked the agents whether they've got a warrant to arrest this migrant, aka illegal. He repeatedly says, "Do you have a judicial warrant?" Walks behind them, according to one of the videos, appears to hold on to the illegal. As the agents are shepherding him towards the elevators, he says to the agents, "I will let go when you show me the judicial warrant," anchoring himself onto this dude. Agents can be seen trying to pry Lander away. This guy he's a comptroller and he's a mayoral candidate. He's not some sort of judge or administrative enforcement. They're not in a courtroom. He's got no power, no jurisdiction. Just some random dude. Agents can be seen trying to pry Mr. Lander away. They ultimately separate Mr. Lander from the man, pushing him against the wall, place handcuffs on him. He says, "You don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens," he says repeatedly. "I'm not obstructing. I'm standing right here in the hallway," as he's hanging on to the dude. "I asked to see the judicial warrant." New York Times says agents don't need judicial warrants to make arrests in immigration courts because they're public spaces, immigration lawyers said. New York Times even saying, "Hey, dummy, you don't have the power to do this and you don't have the right to look at them." Even the New York Times. Dora Pekek, a spokeswoman for Mr. Lander, said that he was taken by masked agents and he was detained by ICE. This is still developing. And this dude had a bunch of women come to his defense. Even his wife was posting about this on X, and Hochul came out. She said, "This is BS," but he got taken down. Here is what Bill Malugin says. Based off this video, this is a pretty blatant interference with ICE by Landers. You can see him locking arms with the ISIS target, just as we saw. He refuses to let go, saying he wants to see a warrant. Bill, who reports on this stuff constantly, says ICE does not need a judicial warrant to make an arrest, nor would they have to show it to Landers because he's some random dude who asked for it. Physically interfering like this is exactly what Tom Homan repeatedly warned about would lead to potential federal prosecution. We'll see what happens here. No charges, of course, because he's above the law, because this is how Democrats operate. Now, here's the video. Locked arms right there. Locked arms right there. Obstruction. Arrest him.
Guys, back up, guys, back up.
Get off.
I understand. You're pregnant, but I need you to back up. If you're interfering with this arrest, we have to arrest.
Warning, warning. You're interfering, warning.
Back up, guys.
This is not legal to take someone without a judicial warrant.
Please don't put him in the elevator and then claim you have the warrant.
They're all listening to way too much Jen Psaki over on MSNBC. They're just listening constantly. Judicial warrant. Just say judicial warrant. They can just say it, repeat it like those little birdies in cages, and it is not accurate.
You don't have a warrant for him.
I will let go when you show me the judicial warrant. Where is it?
So show it. Let us see it. So let us see it before you take his warrant.
Dragging him down. All these dudes finally have enough.
Step back. Please, step back.
All right, enough of you.
Guys, step back. Step back. Step back.
U.S. citizens. Sir, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens. Please stay back. You don't have. I'm not obstructing. I'm standing right here in the hallway.
Now you are, after you had to get ripped off the dude.
Step back, guys. You can take pictures, but please stay back.
To arrest U.S. citizens asking for a judicial warrant. Stay back, please. Stay back.
Press, we go too. Sorry. No way. I'm safe. Where are you taking him? Hello?
Jail. He's being detained.
Where are you taking the controller? No!
Number one is going to go with it, all right? Hang on, please, number one. Hold on. hold on. Brett, this is number one right here, all right?
All right, have a nice elevator ride there, buddy. So he got wrapped up in the arrest, physically, literally, locked arms with the other guy, and then says with a straight face that he wasn't obstructing anything. We've also got Padilla, who is crying about this over on the Senate floor. We'll check him out in a minute. But Kathy Hochul had to go and save this dude. Pretty hilarious. Here's another one from Dapper Detective. Here, Hochul admits she had all charges dropped against Brad Lander. Okay, so she goes in there. Mom comes to the principal's office, pulls him out of jail, and then says no charges.
And that's when I got word of what had happened. My colleague in government, our controller, Brad Lander. The video is shocking. I knew I needed to come down here immediately and check on his whereabouts and do what I could to intervene. I'll let Brad speak about his experience. To my knowledge, the charges, there are no charges. Charges have been dropped. He walks out of there a free man. But here
He walks out of here a free man because I went and got him. Here's that post I was mentioning from Red Steez on X. Stephen L. Miller says, it's like his mom had to come and get him. Look at his wife. Yeah, baby, rubbing his arm like he's a hero. Like he just is, you know, the new civil rights activist media. You did it. Yeah. She comes walking out like she's a hero. And then the wife's rubbing his arm. Great job, honey. Great job. You stood up for illegal aliens in our country. And then they run out and they do their little stupid press conference. So mom had to come down to the principal's office, and the rest of the illegal alien infrastructure that has been built in America rallies around to his support. So we now know that the Homeland Department came out and they told us this, according to Allie Bradley, got the scoop on it, says that Comptroller Brad Lander was arrested for assaulting law enforcement and impeding a federal officer, saying our heroic ICE law enforcement officers face a 413% increase in assaults against them. It is wrong that politicians seeking higher office undermine law enforcement and safety to get a viral moment like these maniacs. No one is above the law, and if you will lay a hand on a law enforcement officer, you will face consequences, except kind of not really. And then when they cause a scene, obstructing people like Kristi Noem, you see they go to the Senate floor and they start crying about it. Here is what Padilla had to say about this after his incident where he ran and rushed the stage while Kristi Noem was trying to give a press briefing. She's in the middle of her speech and a weird Senate lunatic comes barging in. No one knows who he is. He's like, don't you know who I am? I'm a senator. No one cares. This is not your building. This is not your press briefing. It's not time for questions. You don't get to barge in here and do whatever the hell you want. And then he goes into the Senate and screeches about it. Here's what he sounded like.
You've seen the video. I was pushed and pulled, struggled to maintain my balance.
Wow. Come on, work it up.
I was forced
work it up
to the ground.
Come on, dig for it.
First on my knees and then flat on my chest.
Wow. So you can see it's like just a sob story. It's honestly pathetic. It's like not even manly at all in any way, shape, or form. You got tackled because you rushed a stage, you psychopathic person. There's nothing complicated about it. Stop acting like you're a victim of police brutality. There is actual police brutality where police actually do bad things. This was not it. You were in the bad, in the wrong. You escaped without any consequences at all. Now you're trying to curry favor with your illegal alien invaders. Save your sob story for Mexico. Now, Brad Lander came out, spoke about this. I just wanted to share with you his voice just so you could hear a little bit of it. He came out after custody. Here's what he sounds like.
As we can provide, as New York City, as New York State can provide to help them avoid being separated or being detained. But then when we went back upstairs, again, we had these next two cases, this Yoruba gentleman and then Edgardo, who we just tried to walk out of the building, and I think you saw
illegal. So you can see that it matches that facial feature that we saw previously. So Kyle Cheney reports over for Politico. We appreciate his reporting, although I don't think he agrees probably with our political positions at all. He has said the following after listening to Gavin Newsom, right? So speaking of people who are protecting illegals and sanctuary city governors and sanctuary city comptrollers, like in New York, where Hochul and Tisch are running roughshod over American citizens, denying them any equal protection under the law because illegals have due process premium, where they don't even need driver's licenses to drive around and traffic humans and children. But then Newsom is doing the same thing on the other end of the country in the West Coast land, and he had oral arguments today in front of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a pretty big one. But Kyle Cheney reports saying Gavin Newsom's arguments did not appear to fare well at the appeals court this afternoon. This is the National Guard case case, says all three judges had pointed questions about the state's arguments against Trump's deployment, and it appears unlikely the panel will let Breyer's earlier order take effect. Details will be forthcoming. But we had, basically you can break this up in a table of contents, all right? So look at how this started. So you've got Trump's opening argument. Trump's attorney is going to come out. Trump's attorney seems like a pretty seasoned dude, as we'll see right here. This guy right here. Look, pretty polished up, seated there. Looks great. Might be zooming in there. Called Brett from the Oval Office or from the White House or someplace over there at the DOJ office. But he's zooming in on that in the Ninth Circuit. Then we get like two questions against Trump, right? Judge says, courts have no say when the president deploys troops? Well, Your Honor, not really. You know, it goes through that. Hypothetical about the president deploying militias from every state. So the president can just like unload a militia in every state and take over the country? Responds to that. And so kind of like two questions, not a lot. The rest of it, even just from this table of contents, shows that they were going after Newsom, right? Because then Newsom comes out, he's got an opening argument, and then boom, question. Trump comes out with a rebuttal, and just from that alone, you can tell kind of a rough day for him because they got hit with more questions. So what's your justification for blocking President Trump's order? And remember, Gavin Newsom said that Trump had to go through the governor's office in order to get permission to deploy the National Guard when you've got insurrectionary governors who are trying to undermine the entire country, saying, we've got to check with them before we can do anything. Obviously, everybody said that was ridiculous. You have Tom Cotton coming out and saying, our racist Democrat governor would have then just vetoed the desegregation order and all those things. So it obviously made no sense. But that's what Newsom was saying. You have to come through and get approval from us. And so a couple of clips here. Let me just show you a little bit from the DOJ. Here is being asked about the question whether they have any judicial review at all. If Trump wants to deploy the National Guard, can the judges review it at all? Can they step in? Here's what this sounded like today in the Ninth Circuit.
Again, just as to Section 3, is it the United States' position that the court has no role at all in reviewing what the president has done in calling worth the militia under subsection 3? Or is it the United States' view that the court has a limited role and needs to afford the president very substantial deference? Or is it something else in deciding whether the requirements of subsection 3 and ability with the regular forces to execute the laws is met?
Thank you, Your Honor. Our view is that this statute commits the decision whether to call up the forces to the president's unreviewable discretion. So no, there's no role for the court to play in reviewing that decision. And I think it's important to note that the statute here is very similar to the statute at issue in the Martin case that we've cited, the Act of 1795, which had a similar structure. It had the whenever clause followed by a delegation to the president to call up the militia. And in that case, the Supreme Court in 1830 said, that's a decision that's committed to the president's discretion. It's not for a court to review that decision. The plaintiffs try to make out that decision as an outlier, but of course, there have been many cases since then involving unreviewable decisions committed to the executive. The last we cited is the Dalton case.
Is it your view that if the president or a future president simply invokes the statute, gives no reasons for doing it, provides no support for doing it, and
which is not what Trump did at all,
nothing which would appear to a court to justify it, that the court still has no role at all in determining whether the president, this hypothetical future president.
So the question is measuring whether there are factors that the court can measure the president's action against. The president does something saying, I need the National Guard for X, Y, and Z in compliance with the statute. Can the judge even check those boxes? Like, is judicial review entirely foreclosed?
Correctly invoked subsection 3. No role at all, even if the president gives no reasons and there are no facts offered by that president.
Which is not what Trump did, but he's just testing this, to be clear.
That's correct, because if the statute is unreviewable, it's unreviewable. And I would point the court to the last section of the decision in Dalton, where the Supreme Court recognized, yes, Marbury versus Madison says the court decides what the law is, but it also respects that principle when a court recognizes that when a statute is delegating broad discretion to the president, that respecting that also a judgment that a court should respect. It respects the separation of powers when Congress delegates that decision to the president. But I think, Your Honor, you're speculating about harder cases down the road. This is an easier case because there are facts in the record here that strongly support the president's decision that there was.
Right. So we don't need to explore that hypo. We know what the facts are. They're torching LA, and their own law enforcement said that it was out of control, and Trump deployed the National Guard as was his right, and he did it reasonably. Here is more from the Newsom team. So we go over to this guy, and his name is Samuel, and kind of quipping about his age, but I actually think it's great how young he is, and he's responsible enough to be out here doing this in California. But But it is also pretty dang funny because it looks like he just made the varsity basketball team or something, and now he's delivering arguments on behalf of Gouveia. And so a bunch of questions came his direction, and the judges are actually sounding a little bit incredulous, saying, wait a minute, what authority do you have and what justification do we have for blocking President Trump's order? Here is this conversation.
Limited role of judicial review. How can, with the facts here and the language in Martin v. Mott, how can that test be met here by the state to justify an injunction against the president's actions?
Your Honor, I'd like to respond to Martin and then also explain why the state believes the modern language of Section 12406 can't support the highly deferential, essentially unchecked view of authority under the third prong of the statute.
Okay, so modern interpretations can't support that because it's going to be unchecked and this is going to be dangerous for democracy or whatever this is ultimately is. But that's the argument
the government is advancing here. So as to Martin, it was a very different case. It involved the determination of a foreign invasion, also decided many years ago, well before the emergence of modern political question doctrine, cases like Zivotofsky, which say that when a court is addressing a core legal issue like interpretation of a statute as here or the Constitution,
just have to view it in modern terms.
Exercise of judicial review. It's something that courts have a virtually unflagging obligation to do when they have jurisdiction. And I would add, as to Martin, Your Honor, the government has been making a very similar argument based on that case in the Alien Enemies Act context across the country. And as far as I'm aware, courts have uniformly rejected the government's very similar argument invoking Martin in that context, which involves the Alien Enemies Act, which implicates at least something closer to the types of foreign policy or national security considerations that have traditionally led courts not to deem cases justiciable.
So if we were to agree with you that there is some judicial review here, how much discretion, if any, does California believe the president's judgment that this is necessary for him to comply with the take care clause
their own
and to
judgment?
take care that the laws be faithfully executed? How much discretion does he have, in California's view, under this statute in deciding when to federalize?
Your Honor, two answers. So I do think, looking at the text of Section 12406, it's important to recognize that this statute illustrates Congress knows how to accord substantial discretion to the president when it wants to do so, because it does accord that type of discretion after a federalization decision has been properly made, consistent with the factual predicates in terms of the numbers of troops that the president deems appropriate to respond to the situation that justified federalization. You don't see that language in the factual predicates justifying the initial federalization decision, and it's an established feature of statutory interpretation.
All right, so basically, don't interpret the rules in your way, interpret them in our way, because a lot of things have changed since the old way, and things are better now. So here's one more little bit from this guy, and then we'll move on. But he said that the question came up, right? One of Newsom's main arguments was you have to go through the governor. The statute uses the word through the governor. And so he's saying, well, if you're coming through me, then I have like a check valve or something, and I can turn that off and block you if it's coming through me. And so there's some sort of implied consent that's involved in that, and spent a good portion of his brief on that one. So let's listen to how he answered this question. Do you have to get Newsy's consent?
Say that issuing it through the governor requires either the governor's consent or requires consultation with the governor. Where in the text do you take that from?
Your Honor, we take it from the plain meaning of through the governor. So that's the first step. What does it mean to be issued through the governor? For the governor to issue it, we think at a minimum that means that the governor needs to be informed of it and given the chance to issue it. And here's why we think that the statute...
And Newsom was informed that if he didn't get control of the situation, Trump was going to act. I don't think that Newsom says that he didn't get notice that like the National Guard was coming out or have an opportunity to object or talk to Trump about that. But Trump says, I already told you, get your affairs in order or we're coming in.
It should be read to include at least a consultation opportunity.
See.
Because the defendant's contrary
15-minute
view would
Zoom.
pose very serious constitutional questions. Under their view, they can just do the whole process without consulting the governor at all and then slap his name at the top of the document at the end of the process. That risks blurring the lines of political accountability in much the same way as the commandeering laws that were struck down by the Supreme Court in cases like Prince and like Murphy. It essentially forces the governor to share in the political responsibility for...
So if we were to disagree with your reading and looked at this as a ministerial task that's in the statute, would there still have been more that that the United States would have been required to do other than sending this to the adjutant, who is the governor's subordinate and issues all orders in the name of the governor? Would there have had to have been something directly to the governor's email or mailed? I'm not trying to be facetious here.
Like, what do you want?
But if we disagree with you about consultation and consent, was there anything more that needed to be done here as a technical matter, in your view?
In our view, yes, Your Honor, to issue it through the governor, it needs to at least go to the governor. But if I could, I would like to take one
Doesn't want to talk about that one,
yeah. That the federal government's interpretation just can't be right. As I understand it, they do present it as a purely ministerial requirement, essentially a routing requirement to ensure that there's not command confusion in the event that the state guard is transferred to federal authority. The reason we don't think that can be right is there are other federal statutes, most notably the Insurrection Act, which similarly allow the transfer of the National Guard to federal authority and pose the very same types of chain of command confusion the defendants have highlighted here. Those statutes do not include the same through the governor language. So Congress must have had something else in mind when it deliberately chose to add this language to the statute in 1908.
All right, so we got a little bit more. Here is Trump's rebuttal in conclusion. We'll listen to just a little bit of this.
We cited the Dalton case, which was a 1990s decision that invoked the same principle, where a statute is drawn in a way that delegates broad discretion to the president. Courts don't just defer to the president's judgment. Courts don't review the president's judgment. And that's what we have here. And in that case, it was a domestic matter.
Because if the court reviews the president's actions, the court is the president. If Trump needs to get permission to do something from some judge who gets to issue a nationwide injunction or say, turn those planes around, or you can't send people over there, whatever the problem is, they're the president as it relates to that issue if they're usurping executive power, which is what's happening all over the country. California is just one example.
Not a foreign policy matter. So Martin would not be just limited to foreign policy matters. The second point I wanted to make was the easiest path to a decision here is on the third problem. The president made a determination that he is unable, based on with the regular forces, to execute the laws of the United States. The record certainly bears that out, not only in his proclamation, but also in the declarations made clear, and the plaintiffs have conceded there is civil unrest in Los Angeles, but not just ordinary civil unrest. Civil unrest is targeting federal law enforcement officials and designed and aimed to prevent them from carrying out their duties. The court should at least defer to the president's judgment under prong 3.
All right, so Trump's DOJ in there in front of the 3 judges. You can see not a lot of activity from 2 of them. Got a couple of questions from this judge, Emmett, and doesn't sound like it went well for Gavin Newsom. And you can just parse through the table of contents there in oral arguments and see how it went. And while all of this is happening, we've got the Attorney General for the Central District of California, who is now saying he's charging the face shields dude. Remember that guy who was showing up and handing out face shields to everybody? Boom, they charge this dude too. Here's a little bit of this announcement.
On June 9th, he drove his truck downtown with an unidentified woman to hand out large quantities of face shields to individuals who appear to be engaged in violence and vandalism. He was not handing them out to peaceful protesters. His actions were captured on video, posted on social media, and observed by Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies. These face shields are designed to protect from chemical splashes and flying debris, which helps protect violent agitators from less than lethal weapons deployed by law enforcement. When the FBI executed a search warrant at his home, they found a powerful wrist rocket-style slingshot and ammunition for the slingshot, including a bag of rocks and containers of metal BBs, a can of spray paint, plastic goggles, and a notebook with the words 1312 Blue Lives Matter 187. 1312 is an abbreviation for all cops are bastards, while 187 is a common slang term for murder. He has been charged with a violation of 18 United States Code Section 371, conspiracy to commit civil disorder, 18 United States Code Sections 231A3 and 2, aiding and abetting in civil disorders. Each of those charges carries a 5-year statutory maximum sentence. As I mentioned last week, much of the violence has been directed at law enforcement, police officers who are just trying to do their jobs and protect the community.
This guy got charged with conspiracy to commit civil disorder and other charges. But remember what they did with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers? When they came in and they charged Stuart Rhodes and the Oath Keeper crew with seditious conspiracy because they found a document that somebody had written, probably some Fed somewhere, that had QRF in there, talking about quick reactionary forces. And they were going to set up little teams outside of DC and come swooping in there and all that stuff. Remember that? And even John Fetterman says, enough of this already, all right? Stop Tim Walz calling ICE agents the Gestapo. Stop attacking federal agents and Army soldiers soldiers and American citizens. Stop beating up our own people on behalf of people who are here waving foreign flags in our country. Even Fetterman's getting it.
And now with that military parade, again, there was no goose stepping. And now, first of all, let's say, stop ever comparing anything to the Nazis and those kinds of things. That's crazy. And now remember, that's our soldiers. This is not an occupying force. This is a 250, anniversary for the Army. I'm not sure why it's outrageous to have a parade to celebrate the Army. Now, look at that video that's on the screen now. That's not, some kind of anything extreme. It's celebrating, a quarter of a millennia about the American Army. It's I don't understand why that's controversial.
Because they're nut, John, because their brains are fried and they think everything Trump does is really bad. And they screech about whatever it is that happens, no matter what it is that happens, as long as they can attack Trump. So we got a lot happening across the country. Democrat politicians now being arrested and not really suffering any consequences at all. Got taken out of jail by his mom, essentially, Kathy Hochul, and they're probably going to go get ice cream with Gavin Newsom's attorney right before soccer practice and before they go home and finish their homework. So we'll keep our eye on this one, but looks like Trump had a good day over there. Democrats getting arrested, Ninth Circuit agreeing that it is time to allow Trump to execute the law, and we'll keep our eye on this one. Thank you for subscribing and joining as we do.